Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's webinar update. It's really fantastic to see such a strong turnout, and I think it is really indicative of the community that we've built around B-Cycle, but also the topical nature of batteries at this point in time. Firstly, would like to start with acknowledgement of country. The BSC acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of country across Australia. For me here, it's in the land of the Mimari-Meena people. We recognise their enduring connection to land, waters and communities, and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. We honour their deep connection to country and the vital role that they play in caring for and preserving country over thousands of years. Got quite a lot on the agenda, so I'm going to whip through it, but webinar logistics, very quick update on positive charge, which we released this week. Most important, I think, is the scheme review. Quickly touch on our work around material flows, government engagement, and then finishing up on the timeline, and then we can open up for questions. So just on webinar logistics, we are recording the webinar. And actually it probably won't be deleted. I think we usually put webinars such as this up online. So attendees, feel free to submit a question at any time using the Q&A in the top bar of your screen in Teams. Just type your question in when the column appears to the right, and we'll answer the questions at the end of the presentation. So firstly, on to the positive charge report. Really pleased to release last year's annual report. An incredible amount of work's gone into analysing the data and presenting our outcomes for the year. I'm not going to go through the whole report, but I did just want to highlight some important features. Firstly, the B-Cycle community, and one of the fabulous things about BSC is our board. It's a not-for-profit independent board with really strong governance, including COI, conflict of interest policies and procedures, and dispute resolution processes. The board has an independent chair and independent directors, and also representatives of the whole supply chain, which is somewhat unique to the BSC board. But I think having the recycling industry represented is a key reason why we are able to make such informed decisions. So a few quick updates. We have during the year 716 accredited participants, and I think this really does talk to the strength of I'm sorry, I might have just dropped out for a moment. So 716 accredited participants, 58 importers, 67 retailers, 10 collectors and recyclers, and 636 participants. We have 5,206 drop-off points across all states and territories, and great representation in the loose battery market. Good representation in the power tool market, but definitely, highlights room for improvement. And 2% in the e-bike market, which I think shows that this is one of the newest products that we are transitioning to, and there's certainly work to do in that space. We have importers and retailers, and I just really do want to take a minute to really acknowledge the role that each of these organisations plays in our process. Without their contributions and work to support the scheme, we wouldn't be here today. We also have a number of supporters and partners, which is not coming up. There we are. Which is great too, because these organisations work in parallel fields, but also, we share values and objectives. One of the important pieces around our accreditation is that we couldn't be doing this without these 10 collectors and recyclers. These are really the deliverers of the B-Cycle scheme and an important part of our success. So over the year, we collected nearly 3 million kilograms of batteries. We had 15.3% collection rate, which obviously is something that we'll be talking about a lot as we get into today's presentation. BSC definitely sees the need for transformative change in that space. But interestingly, of the 15.3% of batteries collected, we have improved the recovery rate. So 73% of those batteries have gone into new products. In the year, we collected nearly $17 million in levy, and the majority of that's been paid out in rebates. We've also had good communications, and that's also been important, but still a lot more to do in that space as well. One of the things that we have seen is an improvement around accessibility and building awareness about that. So over time, households are reporting that they are regularly increasing their battery recycling. That's improved from 25% in 21 to 36% in 2024. And the number of households understanding that their batteries can be recycled has improved from 35% when we checked last year to 47%. So we are definitely having an improvement there with limited investment, honestly. So needing to, I think once we change the economics of the scheme, we will be able to have a much quicker uptake. Our year-on-year collection rates are increasing. So between FY 2023, when we collected 2,375 tonnes, that's increased by 600 tonnes this year. The collection rate has increased from 12% to 15.3%. And Australians have recycled more than 6 million kilograms of used batteries since we launched in January 2022. And I think it's important to realise that we are actually a really young scheme. And when we compare ourselves to European schemes at a similar time in their life cycle, we're actually ahead of the game. So we are, creating quite significant improvements, which I think, particularly given that we're at the moment in a voluntary space, shows that the design of the B-Cycle scheme is really fit for purpose to really quickly expand. I mentioned the globally competitive nature of the scheme, and I think this is a really important graphic. At only 2 years old, we've managed to collect nearly 3,000 tonnes, and it's not that far behind the regulated scheme in Belgium, which is at 4,000 tonnes each year, USA, which is at a similar level, and then Canada. And clearly our goal is to be well ahead of all of those others. But I think we've managed to achieve this in just 2.5 years, and nearly 3 now. And I think it's really to do with the activity of our participants and the work of the team and the commitment of the board to making change quickly. A few other things I'd just like to draw your attention to, which I think are important in the report. We have the majority of batteries collected at the moment are alkaline at 76.5%, with lithium ion coming up fast. And we would expect to see that shift over time as we invest our activities more in the higher risk batteries. The report also outlines our expenditure for the year and demonstrates where the funding is going. The majority this year, 81.4%, going directly into industry through rebates. So now I'm just going to quickly move into the scheme review. I think you've seen this before, but I think it is something that's really driven the board's decision making and really thinking well into the future of how do we redesign the scheme so that we can solve not just today's battery problems, but tomorrow's as well. Because what we do know is that there is a lot of change in this space and we need to have a flexible design. So the as you would all know, probably the scheme review consultation process has been going on for about 6 months, and it has been an iterative process. We've really taken on board the feedback at each different stage to make sure that what we deliver as B-Cycle 2.0 is a really strong scheme and can future-proof batteries and battery products well into the future. What we heard throughout the 6 months of consultation is that B-Cycle 2.0 really needs to deliver a number of things. It needs to provide a level playing field by addressing free riders and dealing with product quality through regulation. It needs to comprehensively address the fire risk and child safety. And from that perspective, it needs to have a clear path for broad scope expansion so we can manage those risks. We need to future-proof, because what we do know is that technologies are changing significantly. New chemistries are coming on board. Even since we started, the impact of lithium-ion batteries has changed dramatically. And so, unfortunately, the old scheme design didn't really allow us to adapt and change. So what we're proposing is to really change the design in order to future-proof. We need to have, we heard that we need to establish a sustainable but scalable model. We need to cover the cost of collection and sorting operations and incentivise circularity. We need to do a lot more around changing behaviour, particularly through marketing, education and incentives. But ultimately, we really need to accelerate diversion of batteries and battery products, and we're fully committed to that. And I'm really, proud of the team and the work they've done to think through how we could make this work. One of the biggest challenges that we've been dealing with is that we are actually operating in a really dynamic landscape. At this particular moment in time, regulatory reform is really taking a big is going to change the landscape, and so we know that's coming. How it finally looks is uncertain, and that's the reality. We live in uncertain times. Fortunately, we've designed a scheme to work within that environment of uncertainty and really deliver on the outcomes and ensure that we have a strong and sustainable recycling sector. But as you can see from this graph, there are actually a lot of changing things at the moment, around the participation. Obviously, if we have regulation, that's going to increase, but it won't move to 100% overnight. So we need to be able to adapt for that. We need to be able to adapt for market volatility. We need to be able to focus our efforts and our investments around things that will make a difference in terms of risk reduction and increased diversion. The life cycle of batteries is changing, so that impacts our economics. Obviously, collection forecasts are also really important, and we also need to be able to respond to changing economic conditions. So what we've done is really designed a scheme that can both deliver our mission, but do so in a dynamic market. So the options that we've modelled, and this is really, to inform government decisions, we've modelled 5 different scenarios. The first one really focused on sustaining the basics, so recognising our current scope and continuing with the flat levy, flat rebates, but just allowing us to adapt for CPI. And this is the reality that we're working in at the moment. We've got an application in with the ACCC to enable that adjustment, but ultimately regulation will be needed, and the following 4 scenarios really have been modelled and can respond to regulation depending on what the government includes and targets. It introduces a whole range of different scopes. So under option 3 is when we start to bring in the larger portable energy storage. Option 4 is completely transformational. It really has been designed to look at small electronics and electrical equipment with batteries and vapes, but obviously that does depend on both regulation and funding. So there's a lot more detail in the report that you can read, but these scenarios are really provided to demonstrate how the scheme can work. We've modelled the different scenarios and provided a quick summary of the elements. And as you can see from this slide, as we go through the different scenarios, there are increasing levels of investment and scope, and really, I think, demonstrates B-Cycle's readiness for action. Each of these are described, has more detail in the paper itself. So this should be relatively familiar to those of you who have looked at scheme design in the past. The inner circle 1 through 6 really is the crux of the scheme redesign, and I want to walk you through each one of these. We have obviously within each of these, we have made changes and adapted in response to your feedback. We've directly heard what you've said around the need for scalability and increased action. And you'll see from the different options what our intent is. So around the first one, phased expansion of scope, what the strategic intent is really to leverage what we have already, which is the largest fit-for-purpose e-waste collection network in Australia, to enable us to address the evolving profile of other battery products. And what you'll see from this next slide, we've done some really good work over the last month. It's been a busy time, so I know we've been a little bit quiet, but there's been a lot going on to really understand that broader piece. We've analysed the whole small electronics and electrical equipment network, building on the work done by Paul Randell in particular, and identified that we can leverage the existing network of 5,000 plus drop-off points and accommodate 75% of small electronics and electrical equipment. So that's something we could launch immediately with regulation. So it's really that remaining 25%, which we would quickly work to identify and develop additional channels for those larger products. The sustainability investments, what we aim to do here is to enable a mechanism by which we could identify and fund investments that could evolve over time in response to the changing risk profile of batteries and the market failures associated with those batteries or battery-related products. And so this is an important mechanism for us to look at what we need to achieve over time. The current focus is looking at where we've currently got market failures. So obviously a key piece that we're looking to invest in is mitigating safety risk, also raising awareness, supporting expansion of safe collection bins, and also incentivising behavioural change. Again, there's a lot more detail in the paper itself, but didn't want to go into too much detail here. The third element is the objective to have collection network cost recovery and diversification. The aim here is to adopt a cost recovery approach with rebates designed to cover the operational costs of collecting batteries and sorting, and also to have that designed so that it incentivises market diversification within the collection network and to de-risk the scheme. So what we've done is, again, use the scenarios and modelled collection and sorting rebates. They actually don't change too much over the different, with the exception of the options scenarios 1 and 2. The rebates are actually quite consistent. But the reality is that the way we've schemed the design is that we will evaluate the rebates every year to ensure that operational cost recovery is done. So really ensuring that operational costs associated with that activity are adequately covered. It also requires authorisation of the current application to enable that adjustment for CPI in the first instance. Excuse me. But the other scenarios really will evolve as the regulatory landscape becomes clear. What we've done is design a formulaic approach to recognising the changing costs of delivery. And I think, there's some really great work that Brett's done around identifying those formulas and how we can adjust for CPI, for fuel and labour and insurance, for example. And obviously these will be evaluated and approved by the board on an annual basis. But you can see that the indicative rebates, you can see the indicative rebates in the final report. Next part is the eco-modulated processing levels. So the strategic intent here was really to enable a new performance-based processing rebate, and this has been developed directly in response to the feedback from our first round of consultation, and I think it's a really exciting piece. The idea is to really incentivise the recycling sector to deliver higher value processing outcomes and reward organisations who've really invested in advanced technologies and processes and are really on that continual improvement journey. We were asked actually to look at the used oil model, and so we've done that, but we've also taken it to the next level, I believe. I think it's a really innovative approach. We've sat down with the recyclers, we developed a calculator so that they could walk through that, and the types of things that we're looking to incentivise are that circularity outcomes, but also the environmental footprint, audit best practice, transparency best practice, and also proactive promotion of B-cycle. You'll see here that we have circularity outcomes on the left and different accessibility to the rebates dependent on performance across these. And obviously that will be assessed by the independent auditors that work with us. The intent here really is to make sure that recyclers' operational costs associated with the processing activity are adequately covered. And again, these will change over time based on our evaluations and research. Also linked, of course, to the authorisation process. And again, the regulatory landscape, as that becomes clear, we will know what we have to play with. But it also includes a formulaic approach, so that we can recognise the changing costs associated with the processing activity. And once we have all of those things clear, then we will take that to the board for final approval. Eco-modulated levies. The intent here is that the levies be designed to ensure that the true cost of our work and stewardship is apportioned to those batteries or product types that are responsible for health, safety and environmental costs. And obviously, this is a new concept and we went into it in quite a lot of detail in the previous report, but we've also added detail in the final paper for you to review. I think one of the fundamental features of the new scheme is that we really have moved away from a static model. The idea is to provide a transparent process for evaluating the costs across the whole scheme, considering the desired collection outcomes, the scope that we're looking at, the participation levels, and really enable the BSC and the board to establish an annual financial plan that delivers on our mission to create a circular economy for batteries. The review principles that we're really working to, are no surprise, really. We want to make sure that the scheme can align with publicly available indices, with the collection forecasts and emerging risks. We need it to be adaptable so that we can really, respond to changing market conditions, import numbers and so forth. It's been designed to be able to cope with free riders, but ultimately we believe that regulation is required to address that. Co-design is another part of this, which is really important. So we will be having ongoing collaboration and workshops with collectors, recyclers, with importers and retailers, all of our stakeholders, to ensure that the evolution of the scheme actually meets our shared objectives. We also need to be able to scale and grow, but also have really strong ongoing evaluation of the outcomes to ensure that we're delivering on our commitments and that we really are delivering on our ultimate mission, which is to create a real circular economy for batteries and to achieve what our target is, which is 100% of batteries being diverted from the waste sector. So this is just an example of what the annual review can look like. It's based on a formulaic approach, and there's quite a lot more detail around each of these. But it essentially looks at what are the investments that we're looking to make in the year, what are the network expenses, what are our programmed budget expenses, and that essentially lays the groundwork for required funding. That total expenses then has to be divided by the participation level, so the import volume, and that then determines the levy rates. The formulas behind this are provided in the paper, so feel free to go and have a look at that. But essentially what we've done, and I'm really proud of the work that the team has done, is to design a scheme that is both comprehensive and really enables us to respond to regulatory reform as it unfolds. A really important piece, and it's very clear that there is a lot changing in that space right now, and it's great to see governments really stepping up and working to achieve change. Alongside this, we've engaged Blue Environment to do a material flow analysis, and we'll have that data in the coming 2 or 3 months, 2 months, I think, and that will also be important for setting participation rates and so forth. Government engagement, obviously a key piece. We've been working with the ACCC. We've submitted an interim authorisation. Really, this is a short-term measure to allow for CPI increase, and that would be applied subject to board approval, obviously, but at least it would allow us to keep up with cost of living pressures. But really what we're moving to is the reauthorisation, and that's a key part of the B-Cycle 2.0 process. We have to have that authorised. So we're going to submit the application this month, and it is essentially based on the proposed final scheme design that we're publishing today. Excuse me. The Environment Ministers meeting next week, also a really key step. BSC has written last week to all environment ministers with a comprehensive proposal and the draft rules, just a regulatory framework for their consideration. And really the idea was to inform their thinking as they develop their regulatory impact statement. We've obviously been working with state and territory jurisdictions to support that process. We believe the most likely scenario is state-based, and the expectation is that New South Wales would begin that in the new year. I think it's important for all of us, though, to advocate for national harmonised free rider regulation. That's an important way to ensure that we have an efficient outcome. It allows for consistent messaging, so we're having clear messages to the community about battery safety at all stages of the battery life cycle, but also disposal options. This is such a big risk. We need to take it seriously, and we need to have a very clear focal point for solving it. And B-Cycle is incredibly well placed to do that. We have the largest fit-for-purpose e-waste collection network in the country, and we have a strong governance framework that enables transparency and verification. So I think we really have provided as much information as we possibly can to the ministers to enable them to be confident that B-Cycle can really move the dial and go well beyond the current collection rates once we have really solved the static funding model that we currently have. So the timeline that we're working with. So the scheme redesign proposal finalised and published today. We've got the Environment Ministers meeting coming up. We know it's short, but we're publishing a survey today to get your feedback. I'm really hoping that you have time to do that. It can be quite a quick process. So the B-Cycle 2.0 will close on the 19th. Then later that day, we're anticipating hopefully that we can do the reauthorisation application. And the idea is that, well, actually, once we submit the application, the ACCC has a strict mandatory timeline that they must make the determination within 6 months. So the intent is to launch on 1 July 2025. I think the big piece of uncertainty in how this actually unfolds really does relate to regulatory reform. It will unfold over the next few months, and I think the reality is that we are all operating and waiting for that clarity to come forward. And so I think what we're looking for from you is to look at the scheme design that we're proposed and give us your feedback on whether you think that we have landed on the right approach to really react and respond no matter what that regulatory reform looks like. What we have done in the scheme design is really allowed us to scale or to pivot depending on what that looks like. I particularly want to call out a couple of people. Brett Buckingham in particular has played the lead in the modelling, and it's just been an awesome job. And I really can't tell you, how impressive it's been to watch the modelling unfold and to really seek out the latest information around small electronics in particular. But also Jade Barnaby, incredibly important part and designer of the processing performance-based rebate. Bronwyn Boyce also has been facilitating our consultation, but has also been a great asset in finalising the report, as has Cara Delmas and Kirsten Krause as well. Thanks, Kirsten, particularly over the last couple of days in pulling that into line. But the whole team has really, been engaged at different levels in this, and definitely just want to particularly shout out to each one of those. It's been a really busy year, and we are a small team, and there's been a lot going on, and I appreciate the commitment and dedication and hard work of every single one of you. Big thank you. Just, I guess, also just a really big thank you to everybody attending today. I know we had a lot to get through, and I've gone through it very quickly, but also just really want to acknowledge that the work that each of you do in this space and the support that you provide to us, and your willingness to engage with us in what is quite an uncertain environment is very much appreciated, and we really couldn't do it without you. So a big thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Libby, there is a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see, from Jessica Allen.
I can't. No, sorry.
She asks, I know Jessica's been involved in the past, but asks how is the best way to stay connected in regards to child safety home battery storage space and to collaborate more.
I think, what organisation does she come from?
I know she has her own organisation. She's interested in the design of the home battery storage.
Oh, okay.
Space.
Yeah, thank you. I think just stay in touch with me probably is the best thing. I'm happy to have a meeting with you offline and discuss that further. There's actually a lot of work going on around that. Yesterday, we're reviewing the home storage container certification applications, and the Button Battery Advisory Group is in the process of finalising the certification body. And so in the new year, we'll be finalising the protocols very early on and calling for suppliers of home storage containers to enter into that process and become certified.
Thanks, Libby.
Libby, can I also point out the Q&A function doesn't seem to be working, so if everyone could put their questions into the chat, we can see that quite easily.
Okay. Thanks, Cara.
There is a question from Martin Sterling on, can you iterate the maximum potential of kgs we could potentially collect from all the different options? You might have to go back to that slide.
I don't think we put it, which slide?
Or it might not be in the slide, but the one where we describe the different options.
Yeah, I don't think I've got it in front of me. Brett, do you want to just have a quick look at that number? It is certainly significant. Ultimately, it is, I'd have to get it out, but it depends on the scope. And the capacity is, considerably higher. Brett, are you working on?
What was the specific number we were after?
So we're after the capacity that we've modelled for. I think probably we should, the volume for option 4 and 5.
The collection volume or the...
Yeah,
the
maximum collection volumes. Yeah, you're correct. Sorry. The question's in the chat, Brett, if you'd like to
We
have a
haven't
look.
really modelled the maximum. We've modelled what our expectations is, in the short term. But Brett,
the scenarios range from 18% collection rate up to 30% collection rate, depending on the scenario that's looked at. And that's what the details associated with that are included in the paper that is on the B-Cycle website.
But those percentages are short term. Obviously, the capacity is much higher than that. This is really the scenarios that we modelled are short term scenarios that will evolve depending on the breadth and sort of scope of the government regulation.
Also in the paper, there is a section on what happens when that collection, the participation rate grows, and how that can drive increase in collection rate. And dependent upon the scenario that is modelled, that can, the modelling is looking at the scheme moving up to into the area of 60+% collection rate. So a bit difficult to explain the details over the webinar. It's best that you review the nature of the scenarios that we've modelled and then look at the details that are provided in the paper.
And I think, reach out to us if you've got questions or want to discuss anything.
There is a question regarding when retailers will receive the clear guidance for their data on collection reporting requirements for the new scheme. So when that might...
On levy collection or levy reporting requirements?
They didn't specify exactly.
Yeah. I think, well, we can answer that in both ways.
Mm-hmm.
Brett, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so we will be providing some information in the next week or so regarding levy templates moving forward, and so there'll be some information on that. We do have organisations that operate on different payment cycles, so probably the most critical one at the moment is those organisations who are paying based on calendar year, and we'll be providing, as I said, information to those points in the coming week.
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about, whether to move to an annual process, but ultimately what we decided is to leave that quite flexible because it's important to recognise, I think, that different organisations have their own different financial reporting processes, and we want to be as flexible as possible in that. So as Brett said, certainly we will be providing additional information about timing there. And, we're very aware that we need to provide adequate timing in order for you to budget properly. So that is one of the things that is top of mind for us.
I'm not sure if you can see the questions. It might help in you being able to answer them, Libby, so I'll do my best to summarize. There's a question from Andrew in regards to the discrepancy between the levy and money collected. And he points out that currently it's 13 million to recover, well, to have a collection rate of 15%, which would then mean we would need about 78 million for, I guess, 100% collection rate of the rebates. And he indicates without any increase in numbers imported or the costs going up. And where does this levy come from to cover this? And how can BSC talk to investment and where would this money come from? I think, yeah. Does that make sense, the question?
I would say that one of the things that's been really important in the scheme redesign is to recognise that there are different costs associated with different battery types. And as we've navigated how this could change over time, we've been very conscious of price sensitivity, and that means that, you know, obviously we need to keep costs down, but we also do need to manage this risk. And one of the interesting things about the modelling is that it does show that with increasing participation, it definitely also brings the price down. And over time, we will get economies of scale. So I think the next iteration, going from 15 to 30% and 30% to much higher levels, it's not a direct correlation around the increasing levy, because what we will see is that the participation rate has, you know, also a very big impact on the price, and we will also see economies of scale evolve. Brett, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think you're 100% correct there, Libby. Probably then the best way for you to get an understanding of some of those points is to look at the scenarios in the paper. They are modelled on different participation rates, different collection rates, different levels of investment. So there's a number of different, as we say, scenarios that help to give you some insight as to how the scheme might look, depending on, you know, if and when regulation comes, for example.
I think the other thing that was really interesting once we got down to monitoring the inclusion of small electronics and electrical equipment is that that is a key way of cost control, and that we can increase collection rates without impacting the levies of existing participants up to, I think it was 63%, so increasing from 30% collection rate up to 63% without impacting the levy rates. So that's another sort of benefit, I guess, of us broadening the scope. Not only are we able to reduce the risk, but it also means that we achieve those economies of scale much more quickly. So would encourage you, Andrew, to have a look at that component of the paper as well, because it does shed a different perspective on that issue.
Thanks, Libby and Brett.
I'll just also add on that. I think this has been a consistent tension in the scheme redesign in terms of being able to properly, you know, levy as well as set the rebates at a level that covers costs for industry to do the, you know, the mere collection, sorting, and then also the processing. So this is why the regulation is so important, because on a voluntary scheme, it's really, really, you know, challenging, obviously, for an organisation to manage that risk of having that you know, levy being generated at an appropriate level when organisations are participating in a discretionary way. So this is where we've really sought to try, I guess, with the scheme redesign, you know, pull the right levers in all the right places and continue to do all the BSCs continue to do all the advocacy work on mandatory regulation.
And I think, you know, one of the good things about having the whole supply chain on the board is that, you know, we're very aware of, you know, keeping costs down, but also making sure that we have a sustainable scheme, you know, that we really can deliver on the objectives that we're set, that we're not, you know, just tickling along at you know, 15% collection rates, that we really can solve this problem. And I think that's actually been one of the really exciting pieces about this work, is to really sit down and work through, okay, how do we move the dial in this space? And but how do we do it in a way that maintains downward pressures on the levy, and delivers that in a way that is equitable? Because right now, we have all of you who are participating, paying for a much broader problem, both in terms of reputational risk, but also in terms of collection. And so, we need to deal with both of those things. We need to deal with the issue so we can manage that reputational risk and deliver on corporate obligations, deliver on BSC's very strong commitment to battery safety and diversion, but to do so in a way that is sustainable. One of the things that we've included in the report is a sensitivity analysis, and very clearly we need to ensure that the cost impact of this is minimised, and we've been very conscious of that as we've been doing the modelling.
There's been a few questions also, I note, in the chat around the small electronic appliances, the inclusion of those products in scope. Just a bit of background on that. So we have been in consultation with Paul Randell, who did some work with the Victorian government. And so we've based our understanding off a lot of the work that Paul did. In there, we've looked at including small electronic appliances and equipment that has a battery. The intent is not to overlap with other schemes like the NT-CRS or Mobile Muster, but it's looking at those products that are outside their remit. Our focus was not to consider large electronic appliances that don't have batteries, so products like fridges and washing machines aren't being considered. In the paper, there is a list in the appendix as to the nature of the products that are being included. There was a question specifically about what is the weight of product that could be included within this current collection network of B-Cycle. So based on some work done by the UN University, where they identified product weights by particular category, we've identified that products, that 75% of the product that we're proposing to include into the scheme has a weight of 3 kilos or less. And so those products could be included in the current collection network as it exists today. So as I said, there's more detail on that in the paper, and equally happy to take any questions offline about that work we've done there to analyse that sector.
Thanks, Brett. There's just a couple of questions before those small electronic battery and product questions. One was from Robert in terms of, are we going to be doing any promotions and campaigns nationally, and how much money do we have for this, and will we be providing any local funding to support?
Well, that was the interesting thing about doing the scenarios, is that, we could identify what levels of funding might be needed depending on the collection volume that we were targeting. And the new approach to sustainability investments allows us to identify what those are, and also to attribute them to the types of batteries that we're talking about. So button batteries and lithium-ion batteries have significant budgets associated with them. But again, it depends on the regulatory outcomes that we have, because that will impact the level of participation in the scheme, and that then impacts our volume. So you'll see in the paper that we identify a whole range of, across the 5 scenarios, different levels of communications, but scenarios 4 and 5 definitely have significant dollars associated with them. And they also include significant dollars for incentives to really drive change. And I might just mention that we were conscious that there is an expectation by government that we deliver on outcomes similar to that provided by container deposit schemes. Now, BSC definitely does not believe that container deposit schemes are fit for purpose for this product. It is a hazardous waste, and there is no situation in which a family or a child should be exposed to that level of risk of collecting batteries to achieve a rebate. In this particular space, they would need, a few kilos of batteries to get enough return to drop off, and that just creates an unacceptable risk. What we do like about CDS is the outcomes, and so option 4 is really looked at how do we achieve the same outcome as a CDS in terms of collection rates, and do that through, still through incentives, so significant dollars associated with incentives, and communication. So really significant changes in that direction. But, the challenge for us, of course, is that we do need to understand what the regulatory environment is before we can really confirm those budgets.
And excuse me, Libby, there was also a question around the campaigns that we're currently running, which I can speak to. So we do have a number of campaigns coming up, mostly around battery safety awareness. That includes a focus over Christmas when we know consumers are buying and using a lot of battery operated products. Next year, we also hope to expand the battery safety campaign that we've been running since late 2023. And we'd love to partner with some of you on this call to leverage our efforts in this space, so government and also industry partners. And as Libby said, we know that, to make true behaviour change a reality nationally and across the board, that we need to amp up these efforts. So hopefully through the redesign of the scheme, that funding will become available, and then we'll be able to see a big expansion of that work.
Great, thanks. Libby, there's a few questions on our approach to or our concerns with state-by-state regulation model and how we think that will pan out. So Jan asks, do we have any concerns with the state-by-state regulated model? Excuse me. And Andrew, I think that's not your preference, as it wouldn't be fit for purpose, is his comment. And also Cara, I think the sentiment is what might be our concerns if we go down or that pathway happens.
I think what we realise is that we can't control regulation. My sense is that a number of state governments are very strongly committed to solving this problem. In fact, all of them are, and that there is still very strong commitment to delivering a national approach. How that unfolds, though, could be different. I think it's unlikely at this point in time that we'll get a national regulation. But it's very possible that we'll have strong leadership from the larger states, and that will be aligned to the extent that we can implement a strong scheme. And we have really designed the scheme to enable us to navigate that situation. Obviously, we still need to operate either way, whether we get regulation or not. What we see, though, is that regulation is really needed if we're to properly solve the battery risk, the changing risk profile of batteries. And the challenge is that in the current economic climate, where there really are serious cost of living issues and imports are fluctuating up and down, the pressure on a voluntary scheme has just really increased. And while we're fully committed to solving the problem, we recognise that if we simply identify the solution right now without regulatory support, we're likely to lose significant members. And so that's an unacceptable outcome. And we really think it's important that each one of us encourage governments, right to ministers right now, encouraging nationally harmonised approach. And, to work with us to, progress our own BSC's advocacy, to achieve that outcome. I think what we are hearing from states is that there is, some good consistency, but, in the end, it is completely up to government and to ministers to make those decisions. And what we have endeavoured to do is to provide a scheme design that can respond no matter what the outcome.
And following up on that, will the eco-modulated model still proceed if we don't have that regulatory support?
I can't see any alternative in the long run of moving to an eco-modulated approach. If we are going to address risk based on different chemistries and also the cost, I think ultimately an eco-modulated approach will be implemented in the beginning of next financial year.
Thanks, Libby. There's a question from Megan on the maximum weight of items and our current collection network. Perhaps I can answer. Megan, that there was a table that Libby had put up on the scope of what we're proposing to expand the scheme. So in that, the majority, 75% of SEEs can be collected through our current collection network, but obviously with expanding that scope and increasing the weight, we will have to provide new networks and new areas to collect. So we don't anticipate that it would only be our retail or primarily our retail outlets that would be collecting those products and the new weights of those products.
Yeah, it was really great to come across Paul Randell's work on the small electronics and electrical equipment research, market research, that really enabled us, along with the work that Brett identified from the university, the UN university, to identify which products fall under 3 kilograms. So we can accommodate 75% of small electronic equipment with batteries in the current network, and then would need to develop additional networks outside of that. But we've, built in a process to enable us to do that.
Thanks. There's a comment from Elijah on getting the Victorian or state level versions of the stats we shared at a glance. Elijah, we haven't done that to the same degree, but we can happily do that for you. If you want to get in contact with myself or Anna after this, we can provide you that data at a state-based level. Trying to think. There was a question from Janet on how we see the small electronic products and overlapping with NTCRS, which I believe, Brett, you answered. And there's a question, I think Cara answered Rebecca Bliss's question on the scale and time frame for delivering national behavior change campaigns, or did we want to? Yeah, that's great. There was a question from Tony in regards to the distance and logistical costs and challenges of transporting these products, and if we had any further updates in our commitments that would be able to cater to distance from the industrial hubs of where we process the products and where we collect them from.
I think the big commitment is to cover the cost of those operations, and so we've, in the proposed scenarios, we have significant increases in the collection rebates. So obviously they need to be informed by the authorisation and by regulation. But ultimately that is our commitment. And so the changes that we're proposing for Metro, Regional and the new remote rebate has significant additional funding directed at it in order to cover those costs. Because I think what we've seen under the current static model is that the costs associated with fuel, with insurance, with the cost to actually deliver that, it's really been significant. And so we want to move away from that static model, I think we have a good understanding now of what the current costs are, but then also allow over time for us to look at CPI and other publicly available indices so that every year we can review and make sure that those rebates are appropriate.
Thanks, Libby. There was one further question from Ben on the risk of other electronic devices that don't include batteries going into ours that I believe Brett answered in the chat. And I think that is everything. If there are any further questions, please put them in the chat at this time.
Yeah, we're happy to stay on a little bit longer, but I'm conscious that we have come up to time. So yes, as Jade mentioned, really happy to take questions offline. Really just want to thank everybody for their attention and encourage you to go and have a look at the paper and to submit your responses, and also to continue advocating for national harmonised regulation and, you know, to stay in touch with us as that process unfolds. Thank you very much for your attention, and also thank you very much for being part of the B-Cycle community.